Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today, we've got an exciting topic to discuss. We've been getting a lot of questions about why people can understand English when they listen or read, but when it comes to speaking it, they hit a wall. It's one of the most common struggles for English learners, and we're going to break it down today.
Exactly. I think so many people can relate to this. You understand movies, songs, or even conversations, but when it's your turn to speak, it's like your brain freezes. But don't worry, that's totally normal. And we're here to help you figure out why that happens and what you can do about it.
Before we dive into it, though, quick reminder, we've got a PDF that goes along with today's episode, so you can access that through the link in the bio. It's packed with tips and exercises to help improve your speaking skills. And hey, while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Okay, Lily, let's start with the basics. Why is it that so many people understand English perfectly well but struggle with speaking?
Well, there are a few reasons for that. First, we have to talk about passive versus active skills. Understanding or listening to English is what we call a passive skill, whereas speaking is an active skill. They're related, but they use different parts of your brain. When you're listening, you're taking in information. But when you're speaking, you have to produce that information on your own, which takes more effort.
That's a great point. It's like when you're watching a sport, right? It's one thing to understand how the game works, but actually playing the game is a whole different experience. You might know all the rules, but when it comes time to perform, it can be challenging.
Exactly. And it's not just the brain, your mouth and tongue need to get used to forming the words too. That's why people often feel like they understand everything but can't speak fluently. It's a coordination issue as much as it is a language issue. You haven't built the muscle memory yet.
Speaking of which, let's talk about that feeling of knowing a word but not being able to say it. I think this is something we've all experienced at some point.
Oh, totally. That's what's called a tip of the tongue moment. You know the word, you've seen it or heard it a million times, but when you need to say it, it just won't come out. This happens because the brain has different storage systems for recognition and production. So you might recognize a word when someone else says it. But retrieving it to say yourself is harder because you haven't practiced using it.
And that leads to one of the biggest reasons people can understand but not speak English: lack of practice. If you're not actively practicing speaking, your brain isn't building those connections it needs to make the words flow.
Exactly. You could be watching movies or reading books in English for hours. But if you're not speaking regularly, you're not going to improve much in that area. Speaking requires repetition, just like learning an instrument or playing a sport. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
Yeah, and that's why people often improve faster in environments where they're forced to speak English, like when they're living in an English-speaking country. They're constantly using the language in real time, which speeds up the learning process.
Right. And that brings us to another important point: fear of making mistakes. This is huge. So many people hesitate to speak English because they're afraid they'll mess up or sound silly.
Oh yeah, I've seen that so many times. People are so worried about perfect grammar or pronunciation that they just don't speak at all. But the truth is, you can improve if you don't try. Mistakes are part of the learning process.
Exactly. No one speaks perfectly all the time, not even native speakers. The important thing is to communicate. If you can get your point across, that's what really matters. The more you practice, the better you'll get.
So, what can people do to overcome this fear and start speaking more?
One thing that really helps is creating a low-pressure environment for yourself to practice. Try speaking with a friend who's also learning English. Or even just talk to yourself out loud. It might feel strange at first, but it's a great way to build confidence without the fear of judgment.
Yeah, and I've heard people say that recording themselves speaking helps too. It lets you hear how you sound and track your progress over time.
Absolutely. And let's not forget shadowing. That's when you listen to a native speaker and repeat what they say as closely as possible. It helps with pronunciation, rhythm, and fluency.
That's a great tip. It's like mimicking a role model, right? You're copying how they speak until it feels natural for you.
Exactly. And while we're on the topic of pronunciation, I think it's important to mention that pronunciation doesn't need to be perfect. Some people are so focused on sounding native that they get discouraged. But the truth is, accents are normal, and as long as people understand you, that's what counts.
That's such an important point. There's no need to sound exactly like a native speaker. In fact, most English speakers around the world have some kind of accent. The goal is communication, not perfection.
Yes. And speaking of goals, it's also important to set small, achievable goals for your speaking practice. Don't expect to become fluent overnight. Start by focusing on speaking simple sentences or mastering a specific set of vocabulary.
That's a great way to stay motivated. Small wins build up over time, and before you know it, you'll feel much more confident speaking.
Exactly. Consistency is key. It's better to practice speaking for 10 minutes every day than to do 1 hour once a week. The more frequent the practice, the faster you'll improve.
So true. Another thing people can do is to immerse themselves in English as much as possible. Surround yourself with English content, whether that's music, TV shows, or podcasts like this one. It helps train your ear and exposes you to different ways of speaking.
Definitely. And don't be afraid to speak up when you have the opportunity. If you're in a language class or with friends who speak English, make the effort to participate in conversations. The more you put yourself out there, the better you'll get.
Yeah, and even if you're not perfect, people usually appreciate the effort. I've found that most native speakers are encouraging when they see someone trying to learn.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the less you'll worry about making mistakes. Over time, speaking English will become second nature.
So to sum it all up, if you can understand English but struggle to speak it, don't worry, it's normal. The key is to practice regularly, don't be afraid of mistakes, and set small, manageable goals.
And remember, speaking is a skill that improves with time. It's all about building confidence and getting those words out. You've got this.
Absolutely. And just a quick reminder, don't forget to check out the PDF that goes along with today's episode. It's full of useful exercises to help you practice your speaking. You can find it in the link in the bio.
And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you and help out in any way we can.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep practicing and don't give up on your English speaking journey.
See you in the next episode.